Now we're going to talk about the Law of Octaves. And I found this picture and I was pretty pumped about it because, you know, you got 7 bodies all, you know, unfolding there. You got the electromagnetic spectrum, you know, so the whole thing's pretty interesting. But the Law of Octaves is basically represented there, basically. This isn't a Gnostic picture, so, but it's a pretty good one. So, and like I said, entropy and octaves coincide really well. That's why I put them together. So everything in the universe is ruled by cycles. Since the student does not yet possess a permanent center of gravity, they are ruled by the cycles of psychological days and nights. And now we have a handle on what a psychological night is. And by understanding that, we know what a day is also. During a psychological day, the work is easy and fulfilling. Experiences come. We are helped by the masters of the White Lodge, like we talked about. During a psychological night, the work becomes much more difficult. We feel lazy and disinterested in the work. Experiences cease and we feel unattached to the teachings. Kind of a reiteration of what's been said. The work of the path is like the notes of the musical scale. This is why it's called the Law of Octaves. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. We all know them, 7 notes. When the work is begun, we start from do. This represents do. With activity, the scale rises, re, mi, etc. Once you reach ti, an additional effort must be made in order to rise to the next octave, so that the work can repeat. If no extra effort is made, entropy sets in and pulls us backwards down the scale back to our starting point. Okay, so it's a little abstract right now because we're talking about do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do and stuff, but the notes of the scale represent advancement on the Gnostic path. That's what we're talking about by do, re, mi, fa. It's like saying you start to have lucid dreams, and then you wake up in your dreams, and then you get the process of unfoldment. These are, you know, this is do, re, mi, kind of like step 1, 2, 3 along the path. And then we have to apply effort, or else we go back down to not waking up in our dreams, not having lucid dreams, and that kind of thing. So they represent a series of events. The notes represent a series of events. A pause in progress occurs after do, re, mi, and another one after fa, sol, la. This is according to Samael, of course. A greater pause occurs after ti. During a pause, we must apply a special shock to push us through to the next interval. A greater shock is needed to push us through to a higher octave. Does it make sense how we're using the musical notes and the scale to represent our progress on the path? So we're not really taught, like, you wouldn't be able to really measure it out, I don't think, if you try to get all scientific. Oh, right now I'm at do, so if I have another astral experience, I'm at re. If I have another one, I'll be at mi, and then I'll have to put extra effort. Like, you're not going to be able to judge it at that, you know, you're not going to be able to get the microscope out that on it, but this is how the path generally goes, kind of progress, 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 pause. If we don't work at the pause, we go backwards. If we do work, we go progress, 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 plateau, another pause. If we don't work harder or change it up, back down the scale. The shock is applied willpower and greater efforts. If we do not apply a shock, entropy will set in and begin to drag us back down the scale once again. So, I mean, this is the whole idea of entropy. It is crucial to recognize the pauses and to immediately apply the special shock. So to recognize the pauses, I'm not talking about realizing you're at do, re, or mi, but realizing when you've plateaued, or you've sort of stopped doing the work, you're not having as much success, and it seems like it's not as important to you. Once you get to that point, you have to recognize you're at that point. And you have to know that if you don't do something drastic, if you don't apply the shock of willpower or extra effort, that you're going to start getting dragged backwards by entropy. You're going to start losing ground. So the shock is, again, changing the meditations, the runes, and alchemy. Alchemy is a big one, too. We're going to talk a little bit more about alchemy in this lecture also. So, for example, this is what we're talking about. You got your do, re, mi. So do, re, mi equals a series of events on the path, whatever it is. We can use astral projection as, like, you know, the example. Like, okay, you're remembering your dreams. You know, you're writing down your dreams in your dream diary. Now you're remembering all your dreams, and now you're starting to have more vivid dreams. And then there's a pause or a shock needed for an ascent. So let's say, okay, the dream diary is working. I'm starting to remember my dreams. Now I need to Start mantralizing. Start doing ahipto so you can become more conscious. Start concentrating. So you start doing ahipto, or you start doing Fara'an or Lara S. If no shock is applied, you'll start going backwards, down to not remembering your dreams, not writing them down, and back to your starting point. But if you do apply a shock, you're going to ascend to the next one. So now you got Fa, So, La. This is the next series of events. So now let's say that it's a conscious waking up in your dream, and you wake up in your dream, and now you're consciously awake in your dream. And the next one is, say, you feel the process of unfoldment. So you feel yourself actually come out of your body. And maybe the next one is you have a longer astral experience that seems to last longer than any one you've had before. Well, then you're going to hit another pause. And another shock is needed. Because every time you pause, if you're standing still, if you're not changing it up, you're going to start going backwards. And then you have to you have to work harder to get back to having these astral experiences. And it goes for any part of the work. It could be observing an ego or working in alchemy, especially. It could be the same for all those systems. So if there's no shock applied, then entropy sets in, and you get dragged back into a psychological night. Back to the beginning. You got to work again to get back up there. If you apply the shock, you go to the next one, T. Once T is reached, an additional shock is needed to rise the scale up to a higher octave. And then the cycle will repeat at a higher level. Same exact thing. So now you're at Do. This was Do. That's Do again. But now you're at a higher level. Maybe you're having frequent astral projections, and you're not projecting as much ego in the astral plane, so you're starting to get more and more useful knowledge about what you should be doing on the path, say from your divine mother, or your father who's in secret, or the masters of the White Lodge. Yes, my man.
Does this imply that once you reach a new octave, that you cannot go down?
No.
Okay.
Because the law of entropy will always bring you down. Always. It's a constant struggle. If you reach the next octave and you're having conscious astral experiences all the time, and then you stop meditating, or especially if you have a fall, you're going to go down. You're going to go down. Entropy is going to set in. Practice is the key. There is no secret, but there's a secret to be practiced. No one wants to hear that's the secret, because that means you have to do a lot of work. The secret is doing the practice. You must constantly be working in the three factors: the birth, the death, and the sacrifice. The birth of
Solar bodies.
solar bodies, the death of
Ego.
and the sacrifice for
Humanity.
yes. See, that's what we're trying to drive into everybody, especially. This is what we're doing in Gnosis. This right here. Everything else defines it and adds to it, but that's what's crucial. If we do not practice, a pause will lead to entropy, which will lead to an esoteric night. No matter if you're at the next octave or an octave above it, you stop the practices. You're going to have a pause, you're going to plateau, and if you're plateaued and if you're static, you're going to start getting dragged back down, like an undertow, bringing you back down to your lowest common denominator. It's not like you can practice really hard for 3 years and then just say, all right, I'm there for another 3 years and not practice. Yeah.
At some point, the concept was described to me that the plateau you're describing is essentially it's a test of our willpower, like to see if we're actually worthy of progressing, because some people will only progress if they get results.
Right.
So the plateau is a way of really testing if you're actually walking the path because of results or because you actually want
Yeah,
it. Right?
yeah, absolutely. And Samuel War talks about that a lot too. He talks about going through certain tests where he had to wait in a room and there was like 20 other people all waiting in the astral, and they're waiting to get let into this big chamber, and he was the only one that sat there patiently, and everyone's getting frustrated and mad, and they had to wait for what seemed like forever. And then the doors opened and they said, what do you possess that they don't? And he says patience, and they let Samael in, and everybody else was turned away at the door. This is a specific astral experience for Samael Avor, but this is demonstrating this same principle. Also, Rudolf Steiner talks a lot about this too, because he talks about the plateau, and if we give up while we're plateauing, we don't perceive the spiritual world particularly, because we're not like Samael Avor, we're not awakened masters. So we don't perceive the astral, we don't perceive our divine beings, we don't know what's going on in the higher realms. And things can be going on, even though it feels like they're not for us. Our job is to keep our end of the bargain up by doing the practices, even if it means we're not seeing results or that we don't know truly what's going on. Maybe the Divine Mother and the Father who's in secret is suffering terribly for us, and they're dragging us further along the path and we're not aware of it because we're not tapped into it. You got to have the patience of Job, right? The last picture of Blake was a sacrifice of Job. You remember the story of Job? All the tests he got put through? Everything. So that's the idea. You're going to get put through tests, and it's not going to be a rosy path. But, thankfully, during a night, practice will lead to a new dawn. So if we're having a psychological night, the practice will lead to the new dawn. So a psychological day. The dawn doesn't have to last forever. We can start practicing. What we have to do is make the conscious choice to ascend rather than descend. We must change our habits and routines, and we must decide to stick with the work, especially when it seems the hardest. Those three things are key. There are three basic keys. Choose to ascend rather than descend, because now we know. Now we're armed with some more information. We know if we're not moving forward, we're not really just hanging out. We're actually moving backwards. Entropy's pulling us backwards. We have to choose to not fall victim to entropy because we know about it now. We have to change our habits because obviously they're not working, or we wouldn't have stalled out or become stale or become complacent with it. And we have to decide to stick with the work. Say, no, okay, I'm doing this all the way. I'm going to do the work, even though right now it seems hardest. There's a new dawn coming. You have to have, a belief in that. And then when you push through and the new dawn comes, then you can have faith in that, because now we've experienced it. Remember the difference between belief and faith from the other lectures. So, Tiny Tim's got a question. How long does an individual night last, and what consequences are there for those who prolong it? So we'll go straight to the top for the answer here. From the main man. Let's remember very well that esoterically, time does not exist. Time exists for each one of us according to our own activity or inactivity. This was from an actual question and answer from the Master Samael. And what he's saying here is, a night can last for the whole life of the disciple, in the same way that a day can last as long as we wish. The night can last for the entire life, or the day can last for the entire life. It all depends on our own activity or inactivity. So the whole thing depends on you. The choice is up to you. If you don't do the work, then you're choosing to have a psychological night now, because now there's more responsibility when we learn this stuff. Like they always say, it's worse for your karma to know this stuff and not do it than it is to have never heard of it, because then you're ignorant and it's a shame for you.
Ignorance is bliss.
It's a bliss,
Kind of, yeah.
but you're still going to be under the wheel. So I'm sorry, but now we know. Now we have a higher, karmic responsibility to our being and to our Divine Mother and to our Father to start working towards it, because. At the judgment, at the rapture, we'll say, hey, you had the information, you just chose not to be active. And choosing not to be active is choosing to fall into entropy, choosing to fall into a psychological night. It might seem like we're not making a choice, but we are. Every day is a choice. Every time we don't do a practice, that's a choice. Every time we do a practice, that's a choice. The choice is always up to us. The power is always in our own hands, because that's the Gnostic path. It's up to each individual. No book of Samael and Wars is going to save you just by reading it. You have to put it into practice in your daily life. You have to live it. And that's the biggest difference between Gnostic Christianity and traditional Christianity. The idea that a man lived 2,000 years ago and he died and now we're going to heaven. This one says, he showed you a path, you have to walk it, and the choice is up to you whether you go to heaven or not, or whatever, Ascend or descend. Now we're going to talk about the Law of Octaves and alchemy, because it also applies to the alchemical practices.
The alchemical practice, that's a sexual practice.
Sexual practice, yeah, exactly.
If you're single, then...
Well, we still work with our energies when we're single. Someone else says whether you have a partner or alone, you have to work with the energies. So the idea is that when you get to the right spot in the path, the opportunity will present itself as needed, that you'll be able to do this. So this work is important. In the Middle Ages, they had all kinds of great books on alchemy like this, with great pictures like this. You see this guy's holding a staff with a snake with a crown on it, and he's looking at Hermes with the symbol of Mercury there. This guy doesn't have the snake on the staff. I don't really know what the bird is, but you see he's shielding his eyes because he can't look at it. So it's they're kind of telling you these truths. And if you look at a lot of these different, medieval alchemical texts like the Rosary of the Philosophers or the 12 Keys of Basil Valentine, they have a lot of pictures, a lot of imagery. It's always the sun and the moon, the Mercury. It's always a two-headed androgynous being. There's always snakes and cups and water and fountains. But after going through Gnosis, you really see that this is what they were talking about. This is what they were talking about. So we're going to get into alchemy a little bit. There's some chances also to have more alchemical lectures. We're going to watch a video on it. So Alchemy 1 is a video put out by GnosticTeachings.org. Alchemy 2 is a lecture that will be put online, but Wolfgang generally didn't give it because, it's kind of a touchy subject. Sometimes it feels weird sometimes telling people how to have sex, basically. But those lectures will present themselves, and we can talk about it more or less depending on what you guys want to talk about. I mean, it's up to the group. When I was going through Phase C, there was just my brother and I, and so we had Carlos for one lecture. He had a lecture. He said, "Well, let's shut it off. What do you guys want to talk about?" I'm like, let's talk about this alchemy stuff because it's just dudes here, and we can kind of get into the actual practice and talking about it plain English. It was helpful, but I mean, people react differently, so it's an option. It's not necessary. The information will be online.
Yeah.
The information
I
will
want
be
to know.
I want to see
If
that
I have
movie.
the opportunity, I want to know what the heck to do and not miss the opportunity.
Yeah.
You know?
We want to
Well,
see
I
that.
love it.
Yeah, there's specific meditative practices to do while you're connected. And we can talk about that in the
We're
future.
just a bunch of dirty old women.
Yeah,
I don't know. This is white sexual magic, white tantra. It's not dirty.
I know.
It's good. It's pure sick. This is a classical alchemical image, right? That's from the 12 Keys of Basil Valentine. Got the man on the sun, woman on the moon, the dove, the Holy Spirit. They got cross, kind of like what the original Rosicrucian rose on the cross means. The same kind of symbolism as that. Okay, so the Law of Octaves also applies to the practice of alchemy and the birth of the solar bodies. And now, we know a lot of the terms. So alchemy, we know what that is. Arcanum, AZF, same thing. The ninth sphere is the same thing. The forge of the Cyclops is the same thing. There's a lot of different terms because it's been represented a lot of different ways over a lot of different cultures. There's like this sexual teaching isn't only kept within this group. Samuel Avor's Gnosis. He revealed it in plain English, but
Yeah.
it's in the Rosicrucians, it's in Taoist sexuality, it was in the early Christian Gnostics. They all talked about this. There's a lot of... We'll put together a good lecture for all the different areas of exploration if you wanted to, because there's been a bunch of really interesting groups. There's a new book out right now called Cupid's Poison Arrow, which looks at it on a more of a psychological side of it. But they study a lot of Carezza, which was one of the older terms for it, or male continence, coitus reservatus. It's been known throughout the ages on all these different terms. But we'll talk about it more because it is really important to the teaching. So sometimes we have to get past our bashful nature and talk about what's really going on here. We're not gonna be crude.
brainwashed.
It is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
It
Yeah.
is.
Oh, it's dirty.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the Catholic brainwashing.
It is. I'll buy it too. But it's pretty interesting too, because then when the people who are against alchemy or whatever you want to call it, Carezza, coitus reservatus, this practice. Carezza is the Italian word for caress, but they use that in the early 1800s.
Okay.
Yeah. But people always want to argue that point, say it's not natural. It's not natural to do this. To have intercourse without reaching orgasm is not a natural thing to do.
That's what alchemy is.
Yeah.
Against nature.
Yeah, but then they also jump into their Beamers and drive through a fast food window, and what's natural about any of that?
That's right.
We're cooking our food, we're wearing fine silks and using technology. None of that's natural, but they don't have a problem with it until it comes to something that's difficult.
Yeah.
Like everything we're doing is not natural because we have something that everything in nature doesn't have. We have this mental body.
Well, isn't the whole path against nature, going against the forces of nature, so
Yeah.
you could go bypass it?
Exactly. It's a
You don't have to
revolutionary.
stay on that wheel of samsara,
Yeah.
you know?
It's
you
revolutionary.
stuck on it, just makes sense. Yeah.
And I found it was interesting because I've studied a lot of occultism and different groups being part of Masonry and anthroposophy and all this kind of things. And always for some reason when I learned something here, I went and tried to find it in other places too. It's just the way I was wired.
Yeah.
And once you learn about it here, you can really see it in other places. I mean, like Gurdjieff has these books and he talks about the force that higher beings use to coat their higher bodies. In humanity, they just expel it and waste it, which doesn't make sense when you first read it. But if you knew about this system, you're like, okay, we know what he's talking about. And then these books that are highly veiled and highly coded, they become more accessible when you know what's going on with this. So it's pretty interesting that way. Maybe we'll put together a lecture on alchemy throughout the ages and then different practical applications if you guys want. So here's at the very beginning of alchemy. This is the law of the octaves happening. So the food we eat and the air, prana that we breathe, this represents, let's say, dough. This represents dough, the first note. The digestive and absorption processes of the body transform dough to ray. So now we have this food and air. Now it gets absorbed in the body and transformed into a different form of energy. Ray becomes refined and passes by osmosis to the bloodstream, where it is further and further refined. Goes through further transformations in the blood system, which would represent mi, fa, sol, la. It goes through all these different transformations. Finally, the scale culminates in the sexual fluids. That's T. So this doesn't really have anything to do with alchemy. This is just esoteric physiology, basically. And take food in. Like, we don't often think about it, but we know like our reproductive organs and our fluids and everything, it doesn't just happen from nowhere. We're taking stuff out of the environment, transforming it in our bodies, and then we have this sexual fluids. And Gnosis, he has a name for it. He calls it sexual hydrogen T12. It's what it refers to as T, like do re mi fa sol la ti. So, and there's a lot of numbers, and he uses a lot of scientific language, which we don't get into all of that because it might confuse things before the test. But shock is needed to raise the scale to the next octave, because all we've done here is taken in food and air and turned it into this, sexual fluids, like the semen, the reproductive system within the woman. And this is what it's been turned into. So we can either, cultivate it, or if you expel it, you go back down. You have to eat more food, transform it again into this, sexual fluids and that. And then if it expels, you got to go back down the scale and do it again. Or we can give a shock.
So the food we eat / air / prana.
Yeah.
The concept of the super substantial bread. The idea give us our bread, our daily bread. The idea that the bread is meditation, or is this a different concept being expressed?
This is sort of a different. This is a much more materialistic, physical concept. Like we're talking about actual food. We're not talking about it symbolically or allegorically.
Oh, okay.
Like this is the physical food. You put bread in your mouth, through the body, transforms it, and as a result, amongst other things, obviously, right, your body uses food for everything, cell generation and growth and hair and fingernails, but it also creates these sexual fluids. The idea of like the bread and the wine, that has to do more with accumulating higher forces into it, and that is something we will get into in the future for sure. The shock needed to raise this scale is alchemy. This is what you need to raise the scale of the sexual fluids. Like before, we were talking about the scale in terms of the work, either elimination of ego or astral projection. Now we're talking specifically about the sexual fluids in the creation of the solar bodies. So the shock we need at this point, when we have this food turns into the sexual fluids, we need alchemy. Through alchemy and transmutation, the sexual hydrogen, T12, saturates every cell of the body as it rises up the scale. So that's how you get the sexual energy to rise up the scale. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. So this is like, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti is more representative, as it's not exactly specific points. So my fluid has risen to re, or mi, you wouldn't pinpoint it like that. It's just the idea that it has to climb the scale. It has to get higher has to accumulate more power. Once the entire body is saturated, the sexual hydrogen begins to crystallize in the next octave. So the shock we're giving it is alchemy. The alchemical practice, the uniting of the man and the woman, the white tantra. The shock of alchemy and transmutation causes the sexual hydrogen to rise to the next octave. In the next octave, the sexual hydrogen begins to crystallize the solar astral body. That's the idea of. So the first scale is from food to fluids. Second scale is it rises up the body up to T, and then the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, yeah, T. And then the next do, when it gets to the next scale, that's when you're starting to crystallize the solar astral body. This body is born from the same substance as the physical body, but only the procedure is different. We know that the sexual energy is the energy that of all growth and all birth. We know from the union of man and woman and the sexual energies, that's how every child is born, that's how everybody here was born. Now we have the union of man and woman again. Without the spilling of the fluids, we're still creating life. We're creating our solar astral bodies. It's the building blocks material for all of life, so why would it stop? Why would it stop once you hit puberty, or once you get, once you hit puberty, we think, okay, our sexual stuff is done until you get older. But in truth, no, we just keep cultivating. It keeps growing. We have this energy inside of us. We have to harvest it. And we have to use it, and that's what creates our solar astral body. With a continual shock of alchemy, we have to keep applying alchemy. And alchemy has to be done in conjunction with understanding, self-observation, and the elimination of the egos. And there's two practices you can do with alchemy. I don't know how much we've talked about it, but I think you understand that you can eliminate ego or build solar bodies. When you're doing alchemy, there's two things you can do. So this is the practice of building the solar bodies. Not in detail of how to do it, but just the idea of how it works. When it comes to eliminating ego, there's another process where it takes two partners, and you can only really work on one person's ego at a time, but you work together for each other. That's why they call it like the true love, because now you have a partner and you're working towards them or something higher, your higher being. You're not, trying to race each other to a finish line or something. Just, using each other that way. So the solar astral body rises up the scale, same way that we did in the physical body. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. And then once you get the do, the scale then rises to the next octave. You still have to apply willpower and the shock of alchemy, and then you start to crystallize the solar mental body. This is the idea of how the solar bodies are created, which in turn rises up the scale to the next octave. This is the process for creating the solar bodies. And you have the Kausal, the Buddhic, the Atmic, these bodies. This is how they're done, through alchemy, through the elimination of ego. As we were talking about earlier, you could create them without eliminating ego, but then you're Hannes Musin, kind of like you have an astral body you're conscious in, but now it's being controlled by the egos. So you're just giving the egos another outlet or another weapon, basically. But we obviously don't teach that path. We teach the path of eliminating the egos, death of the egos, birth of the solar bodies, and then you sacrifice.
That's what I think is so funny. Like so many people are discouraged on the path of Gnosis because their ego tells them they need a partner.
Yeah. When
they fail to recognize that that ego needs to die before they can even find their partner.
Absolutely.
It's such an interesting thing. Like people, they're using their mind to try to find any reason to avoid working.
Exactly.
Right?
It's the ego looking for loopholes, trying to convince you.
Then the ego says, "Oh, what's the point?"
Exactly. I mean, Samael talks about it. I remember one I read and I thought, this is profound, because he says, if you're a man and you're on the Gnostic path, but your wife doesn't want to practice alchemy, it's not her fault, and it's not something you should be projecting onto her as blaming her for it, because you're not ready for it. You have internal work you have to do. You have psychological work. You have to start working on the egos. And what he would always say is, my wife won't work on alchemy with me. He said, okay, well, what ego are you working on right now that you need her help with? Oh, well, I don't really know. Well, you have to be working on an ego. You don't even need alchemy right now. You're not even working on an ego. What are you complaining about? So, I mean, if you read his books, particularly the ones that have question and answers, he really cuts It cuts right to the point, which is a lot of stuff I like. Makes it feel like turn the question on its head. Some guy went wham, he went get over it, basically, you know. That's how I view it, which is the most poetic, I guess. But each body has within it the notes of the scale. I like how it corresponds with the 7 chakras. I'm not saying that exactly, that those are exactly what the notes are, but it corresponds really nicely. And even in this picture too, I like how they have the colors, because you're seeing, if you looked into the electromagnetic spectrum, that is the colors of vibration. Red is the lowest vibration, violet is the highest vibration, and then from there you vibrate out of these chakras. You know? So I like these kind of pictures. So they all have the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti kind of represented in them. Each body has chakras or their interpretation of chakras. I don't know exactly what the terms are. I know the etheric body is called something else. The astral body is called chakras. The mental body is called... But they're basically the energy points. In the physical body, they're organs or points in the spine. But each higher body repeats these notes in a higher octave. It's kind of easier to look at it that way. We're thinking the physical body's 1 octave, you know, the astral body's another octave, the mental body's another octave, and we can really kind of visualize it as being higher octaves. Although I guess once you really made them all, they'd all be existing simultaneously in one space, not on top of each other like a ladder. But they are higher in vibration, frequency, and higher along the spiritual path. Higher in terms of, you know, more experience and you're further on the path. If we do not apply the shock of alchemy, or if we fall, we will begin to descend back down the scale. The fall, obviously, we're talking about the spilling of the cup, the orgasm, you know, if we want to say it. I want to say it bluntly. If we have a fall, you're going to start...
Like blunt.
Yeah, blunt, okay. So if you lose the energies that you're conserving and that are climbing the scale, you're going to start going down. And it always says that, Samael talks about it being, you know, related to the fall, is how far down you go. Say if you're working in alchemy, you're trying, but you're new at it, it's not an easy practice. If you have a fall and you're trying, it's like, you're not going to fall as far as if, say, you went back to having a one-night stand or something with some random person, you know, full of ego and everything like that. You're not going to fall as far. But the idea, I mean, even today, there's only one real word that has survived from the Hermetic tradition. And you know what it is? You know the Hermetic tradition, Hermes Trismegistus? There's only one word that we use commonly today. It's the Hermetic seal. And you know what a Hermetic seal is, that nothing can get in or out of, right? These Hermetic seals they put around hospital appliances and stuff. Well, that came from this Hermetic tradition. And what would the original seal be they're talking about? The Hermetic seal is sealing the sexual energies in and rising the mercury. And that's the idea. This is a picture like Wolfgang always drew it. So you have this mercury ball, and then so you do. That's not a great picture, but you know, maybe we drew this one for you guys too. You're working in alchemy, and it's rising up this scale of different, you know, levels. But then if you had a fall, there it goes, comes back down. Then you have to start again to get back up to that level again. I'm going to erase it because it looks like a dirty picture.
That's what I said. It looks like a penis.
Yeah. Trying to draw a thermometer, you know?
Yeah,
That's
I'll make a graphic.
Oh, I thought it
Yeah,
was like
like-
a thermometer.
Yeah. It's supposed to be a mercury-filled thermometer, and those ticks were the levels of reached. Get your minds out of the gutter, everybody.
It's not my fault you're not a good artist.
Fair enough. Okay. So that was just to illustrate the idea. If we have a fall, that's the seal. That's the energy we're using to raise the octave. But if we're expelling it, we're having the orgasm and losing all that energy that way. I mean, the energy's got to go somewhere. You got two options. It can be expelled massively through this big energetic shock that is actually not good for your body. If you start looking into the recent studies that they're doing, particularly in this book, Cupid's Poison Arrow, they talk about the crash you have after an orgasm. It takes about 2 weeks to come back to homeostasis within the body.
Really? Oh.
So it has to go somewhere. It can go that way, or it can go that way. A lot of our views of sex are based on our small brain. They call it the mammalian brain. Yeah.
Today on the doctors, they were talking about oxytocin, the good
Yeah,
feeling.
the cuddle
They
hormone.
said after orgasm it lasts 5 minutes, and after a hug it will last about 3 hours.
Mhm. This is the idea. Yeah,
Oh,
this they call it the cuddle hormone. And this Kareza, particularly, like these other practices of alchemy, they don't have the spiritual component we do of trying to raise the energies, but they have the idea of the crest. You're not making much motion or movements, but you're supposed to be caressing each other, and this strengthens our bond mechanism with each other. And this same, I forget the hormone it's called, but you just said it.
Oxytocin.
Oxytocin. It
Yeah.
increases oxytocin, and it creates
Oxytocin?
yeah,
Uh-huh.
Oh,
creates a harmonious relationship. Whereas if you have a relationship where you're having lots of what we would consider great sex all the time, or having all these orgasms, actually what it does is our mammalian brain will kick in. And our mammalian brain from the animal existence will say it's trying to procreate the species. So as soon as you finished one mate, it has you looking already for another one. So that's why you have all these relationship problems where you feel like, oh, she's just not the right one, or he's just not the right one. You know, we're having sex all the time, but it's just not right for me, because internally something psychological from your mammalian brain is going on, saying procreate the species, find another mate, you know, ensure that the species survives. This is an animalistic nature of our brain. And the idea of alchemy is the most highest spiritual practice of this, but Kareza and that, the idea is that it promotes bonding, and this idea of cuddling, and this idea that we're now pairing up and we're mating, and you're doing this because there's differences between, you know, rubbing somebody's back because you're expecting to get something out of it, like it escalates to sex, or rubbing somebody's back because you love them or you want them to be happy. And this is the difference that they're finding.
comfort them,
Yeah, this is the difference they're finding with this. So alchemy is that, and then so much more also.
I also heard somewhere last week on another program that they said the hugs were becoming the new handshake, but people aren't really comfortable because
Mhm.
everybody on the street now wants to come up and hug you.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, acquaintances, not really.
Sure.
Yeah, so
I can see that too.
everybody thinks it's...
Mhm. I'm not overly a huggy guy either, so I can understand where they're coming from.
But I know
But
a
I
lot
mean-
of huggy people,
Yeah,
and they're always...
yeah.
I remember once I was at New Year's, I think I was in Canadian Tire, and one of the teachers from the school, he came and hugged me, and one of the men in red came over and said, "Are you okay, ma'am?" and I said, "We're
Yeah,
friends."
yeah,
You know, and
yeah.
I thought he was overreacting, but then I
Sure.
read somewhere that there was a man,
Yeah.
I think it was a professor from Western, and he did something to some lady in Shoppers Drug Mart, so I guess
Oh.
these people are kind of, the security
Sure.
guards are on the lookout if
Yeah.
somebody's, you know.
It's a
Yeah.
shame. It's a shame. And we talked about too before the esoteric personality for people who want powers and that kind of thing. They can also use alchemy as a doorway into a bad place. You can use alchemy and do that too. People will be like, "Oh, I want to practice alchemy." Oh, I just, you know, try and they can twist it around and get all kinds of bad things out of doing this if you don't do it from the pure. That's why they always recommend, or someone always suggests, it's between a man and a woman, preferably a married couple, because you're in a sacred bond doing a sacred act now. It's not generally something, I mean, I'm not putting labels on whatever anybody wants to do. Just when you're in that kind of situation, you're have a better chance of doing it for the right reasons, as opposed to saying you meet some guy or meet some girls. Hey, let's try this alchemy thing out real quick tonight. You know, it's like, do you really want to try it out, or are you just fooling yourself into, being promiscuous? So, I mean, so the bond of marriage does help that. I mean, we're not saying nothing that someone else says is a judgment that you have to do or you're not going to be accepted here. But this is, if you want alchemy to work, this is how it works. We run into a lot of trouble too, with homosexuality and that, because they'll say, well, how do homosexuals perform alchemy? It's not in the teachings. Alchemy is this, between a man and a woman. This is the teachings. I don't know what
It has to do with the positive and negative force.
Yeah, exactly. It's two forces, but it's not a moral or ethical judgment being made.
No.
It's just, this is a specific spiritual scientific system that we've been shown through Samael unveiling it, and this is how the system works. Why don't you get a higher number when you subtract two numbers? It's not how that system works. It's subtraction. It's that kind of thing.
But don't the homosexual, the gays, have like hormones or something that they will be more one will be more feminine, one more masculine? So wouldn't that kind of, couldn't they then fit in with these teachings?
I don't know. I've never read anything about alchemy working that way. I've read stuff about, Black Tantra working that way.
Because they had a man on today, and he had both born that way,
Yeah.
and he got married, and then he had an accident. I think was it a car accident, or bicycle, or something. And when he had his blood tested, he was both. He had positive and negative, like they couldn't tell if he was male or female. And he always wanted to be female, so then he went through the whole thing, and now the woman has. They got divorced because they were no longer man woman, but they're like he calls her. She now has a wife instead of a husband,
Oh yeah.
and it gets really
Yeah.
complicated.
Yeah, it's a complicated world.
So I mean, he wouldn't. I don't know where he'd fit in
Hard to say.
having like both.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I didn't make
The X and
this
the
up.
Y
I just,
chromosomes, I guess
yeah.
I was thinking. Yeah. So he
Oh,
wouldn't.
I-
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like when you look at the system this way, it makes sense why this system works, but without without moral judgment on anybody, even straight people who don't believe in this or anything. This is a system. This is a system we've been shown. This is how this system works. Maybe there's other systems out there. I don't know. So for me, I just always just doesn't come up very often. So it comes up sometimes because people will get offended, obviously, but it's
Well,
not
they
a
still-
moral judgment that anyone's trying to be making.
Why couldn't it just be the same? Like they're still having sex, so if they don't have the energies and the fluids and all that stuff, release of that, then wouldn't they still be able to do the path?
Yeah, if they're working with their energies, I don't know. Nothing written about it, and
Like two females,
I
two
didn't.
males.
I didn't.
The master says that that's how people, about vampirism,
But what?
vampires,
Oh, yeah,
they practice this kind of sexual magic,
yeah.
and that's how they become vampires. So, like Count Dracula, he practiced this kind of black magic,
Yeah.
and then that's how he became.
What kind of black magic?
This kind of like
Homosexual?
homosexuality, like practicing in the same
Two,
poles,
same gender?
the same gender.
Oh.
Basically, yeah.
degenerate
Yeah.
and
Okay.
become vampire.
I say in the
But,
teachings, all forms of, tantra that aren't white tantra will, even if they're not black tantra, they'll eventually lead to that.
Oh,
Because
okay.
white tantra is this exact practice, as seen even in the Gnostic Gospels that they found. Black tantra is the opposite practice of this, where you're, purposely not saving your energies to raise them. But everyone generally lives in a state of gray, what they call gray tantra, where they're either spilling their energies because they're not aware of it, or they don't think it's that serious. But over time, this will degenerate into black magic, or the intentional use of your sexual energies for negative purposes.
The master also mentions that when he started, he began to work with different women.
Mm-hmm.
There's this kind of sexual alchemy.
Yeah.
And then he said, well, I don't progress, I don't ascend. Because he was working with different women, so there has to be with just one woman and in a, like you said, married, bonded
Loving
couples.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Loving
That's how you
we
feel.
were legally
It's not like
bonded.
a physical thing, it's
Right.
more mental.
Right, because
Yeah,
now we're getting to like the more
Spiritual thing.
etheric
Yeah.
spiritual plane. We're not talking about just a scientific, physical process of the body. We're talking about subtle energies that we can't really perceive. And obviously the emotions and this kind of thing, the connection with another person,
Yeah.
this is all part of it. It's all part of the recipe, basically, you can say. Oh, yeah, so where are we? Here we are. Yeah, the law of octaves is a natural law in the universe. However, there is no law of nature that will evolve you to the next octave, right? So we talked about that too. It's the same with the work. It's the same in alchemy. You're not going to naturally just have your energies rise. I mean, they did at one time, before the sexes split. If you remember the different races lectures they talked about. So I think it was the Lemurians who split the sexes, but before that, like the Hyperborean and the Protoplasmic, they all ascended because their energies were contained, and they contained both energies in them. Then we've been split now, so the men don't contain the female energy, and the females don't contain the male energies. And that's why they have to come together in the practice of alchemy. That if you remember that from the root races and lectures, I think probably Lee gave it to you. Yeah, he did. So nature is the wheel of samsara, incessant and unrelenting. We talked about that. So this is a good picture that to me shows the wheel of samsara. You know, from birth, you're getting older, you know, you die. And this happens like 108 times, right? If you remember. Is what someone else says. 108 times. And then you go back down through the animal kingdom. And then you go through the animal kingdom, devolving down to the plant kingdom, down into the infernos, you're at the mineral kingdom, and then back up again, plant, animal, human, 108 times. We're not being reincarnated, right? We're returning recurrences. We don't have the reincarnation because that's for awakened masters. We're just subject to these mechanical laws, bringing us back and back and back. And if we don't start fighting entropy or raising the octaves, we're going to be stuck on this wheel. So you can kind of see how this wheel is entropy. And then comes back around. And then if you go through, all the numbers in my head are a little bit mixed up, but I think it's 3,000 cycles or something like that. They have a specific number. And you don't awaken, then you go back down to the infernos, into the mineral kingdom. You go through the second death, and then your essence is raised, but it doesn't feel like a conscious process. It feels like you're suffering because all your egos that you're so attached to are being stripped away almost violently, and you're so identified and attached to them, you feel like that's you, a part of you that's suffering. So the idea is that to get off this wheel, we have to apply the willpower and the energy. We have to do it of our own free will and accord, basically. We must fight the law of entropy at every moment. We have to keep moving forward in the work. Practice, meditation, transmutation, sacrifice, self-observation, and elimination. And I don't know if it's been stressed, but transmutation practices should be done regardless of whether or not you have a partner. We should be transmuting our energies. If you're working with the energies, and you're trying to conserve the energies, and you're not transmuting the energies, then you're bound to have a fall, whether it's for a man maybe a nocturnal emission or something weird, or a weird outburst of emotion, where it's going to express itself in some way if you're just letting it pool up until it bursts. What we're trying to do is, conserve it, transmute it. Conserve it and transmute it. The idea of conserving it without transmuting is dangerous because you're kind of destined for a failure there. Because now you're just sort of storing up, like trying to keep all this water in, say, a little old leather pouch that's about to burst, and you're not doing anything with the water. It's just going to blow up the pouch. You have to transmute the energies. For men and women. We must apply super efforts to reach the next octave. We call them super efforts because we think we're applying efforts right now. I mean, we're sacrificing. We're here now, giving up a night. We're thinking about it, the practices and reading them. But to get to the next octave, we're talking about something drastic. We need super efforts. We need to practice daily. We need to really start self-observing. Fighting entropy and applying willpower will push us to a superior octave. That's what it takes, willpower and fighting entropy. Only by creating the superior solar bodies can we hope to escape from the mechanical wheel of samsara and its laws of return and recurrence, right? There's nothing romantic or glorious about return and recurrence. It's not like we talk to some different schools and say, I believe in reincarnation. It's beautiful. Come back and pick my mom, pick my dad, pick my family, and set up this whole life that I planned out for myself. It's like, maybe if you're an awakened master in the Gnosis tradition, we could agree with that. But for the most part, it's return and recurrence. It's mechanical. You're not choosing. In the tarot deck, you have the fool who's walking over the cliff, not looking where he's going. That's the idea of return and recurrence. We don't know where we're going. We're not controlling it. We're not in charge of it. We're at the will of these external natural laws of karma and return and recurrence, the law of entropy and all this. So only practice and willpower will get you through a psychological night and lead you to the promise of a new dawn. I like this picture because it kind of demonstrates who it was. Psychological night, they're putting the work in, still giving her. So it's only by doing the practice that we'll get through this night. And that is the end of the lecture. So, we can take a short break, or if there's any questions, we can. Yes.
That return recurrence. I remember Lee said once, you come back like even to, the same neighborhood, the same job. Like he said, he was a Jewish rabbi, now he's teaching. So, is that because I thought it was because maybe it's different people, they tell you you choose your parents because this is what you came to work on, and
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm just totally confused about, so there is no, in Gnosis, there's no reincarnation, it's return.
There is reincarnation for awakened masters.
Oh, yeah, but
Who
not for,
choose.
no.
No, one way I can get sort of behind the idea of, say, people say you picked your path and you put the stuff in front of you, is if the you you're talking about is maybe your divine father who you're totally unattached to right now, maybe the divine being in the
Because
monad
I would think,
is doing that, but
yeah.
the you they're talking about is their egos and their personality. That's not picking anything. That's at the whim of these forces, natural forces. And what Lee's talking about, like, I don't think he means literally the same neighborhood, because,
No,
but under the same circumstances, and the same dramas, and very similar things happen until you start, eliminating the egos that cause them, because it's the egos that are returning to relive their fantasies and their desires. You eliminate that ego, then you won't have that problem in the next life. And you slowly advance towards more consciousness.
because I remember asking him something once, and I said, it's exactly how it happened, like the way I thought it would, and he said, well, you're just remembering, as if, that had all happened before, and
Yeah.
I thought,
Well,
just didn't
it has happened before, but
yeah.
they say the dramas and comedies and the tragedies repeat themselves. That's what the law of recurrence is. Return is we come back here. Recurrence is the same events happen over and over again in our lives, over multiple lives. So, although it might even be the same people in a different form now. Maybe if you had a fight with some man in this life, maybe in the next life you're a man, you have a fight with a woman over the same thing. So like the situation's repeating itself.
Mhm.
It could even be like the same soul person, like the same other essence and ego that you're fighting with. Exactly, usually is, because the egos will search themselves out to relive from both sides.
Well, I asked him that too, because I said, like, certain men, I mean, it's all there on paper, they've got all the right things, but if there's no chemistry, and I said, what does that mean? Like, what is chemistry? And he said, well, that's remembering, like, someone that you already knew from a past life, whereas,
Could be.
but my friend thought it would just be the opposite. She said, if you knew them from the last life, you wouldn't have any chemistry with them, like, you would want to know them again or something.
Well, you may not go anywhere with it if you have this chemistry. It could be the egos attracting each other, because in the previous life you didn't awaken to consciousness, because these two got together, maybe this life also. It's hard to speculate on every in and out of possibility, but the idea is that the circumstances do repeat themselves.
Well, going back to the psychological day, I remember the master, he mentions in a book that when he was young, he had a lifelong experience that helped him to overcome the entropy.
Yeah.
And that was the experience of the illuminating void. It's like the ecstasies,
Yeah, the
you
samadhi
know,
state.
the samadhi, the ecstasies.
So he thought of that?
He was like 18 years old, and then he practiced that. He said that event changed his life forever.
Mhm.
It was like a big shock for him, and kept him in a continuous psychological way.
But what did he practice?
He experienced the ecstasies, the samadhi. Samadhi's
Illuminated void, really high level of
a
meditation.
high level of illumination,
Very hard to explain.
through
Like the yogis do
meditation
this.
Mhm.
Yeah.
and everything. So because he experienced
Oh, okay.
the totality,
Mm.
Yeah.
so it's like being one with God,
Yeah, exactly.
something like that.
And that's the same idea we're talking about with the astral projection. Only astral projection would be on a much smaller scale, as this samadhi would be a much larger scale, so it probably would keep him going for his whole life. If you remember astral experiences, it'll keep you going forward, for a while. Because it's the same idea, but it's not to the extent as what
It's the
samadhi
same,
would be.
yeah,
For those
exactly
people
the
who
same.
almost die, they see the light and they
Mhm.
come back, well, they've got just a whole different
Yeah.
attitude about life. Like, they've
Mhm.
got all kinds of energy, and they're, happy and everything, yeah.
Yeah,
That's true.
different.
That's what we're trying to do, is cultivate these experiences that will help motivate and change.
And sacrifice, it's also sacrifice, not only sacrifice for humanity. We also need to sacrifice our sufferings. So the master says that we need to. We're always complaining about how we suffer in the past, oh, I went through this, I
Oh,
went
yeah,
through that.
okay, yeah.
So he says that we need to overcome these kinds of sufferings, that we are able to sacrifice our old habits, our bad habits, our attitude, but we
Yeah.
don't sacrifice our sufferings. So it's also an important part of the sacrifice. Another aspect of the sacrifice. to receive.
Would it be more like letting go of that, you know, or not really attaching yourself to,
Not
to,
attaching yourself.
yeah, to your old sacrifice, because then you're feeling sorry for yourself. Although for me, I went through all this.
Yeah.
Is that the kind of thing he's talking
That
about?
kind of thing, yeah.
Where you just let it go and just look at it as a learning experience. You have to go through it to get to the next level.
And if you're still alive, just be grateful. Like if
Yeah,
your house burned
exactly.
down
What
and
doesn't
you're-
kill you, you know,
Yeah.
make you stronger or whatever they
You
say.
can replace
Exactly.
that, and,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.